Kia ora, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to another Manaaki Whenua LINKOnline Webinar. It's fantastic that you're all with us here today, and I can see more people joining us by the second. Unfortunately, Tiffany, who normally does the technical introduction and helps support us with this platform, has not got the greatest voice today, so I'm flying solo. I will just briefly introduce our speaker and then hand it over. So Susan Walker, who will be talking to us today as we're having technical issues with video. So we'll be looking at her beautiful pictures and listening to her lovely voice. She will be known to many of you by reputation at least, but for those of you who aren't already familiar with her, she's a senior researcher in the ecosystems and conservation team here at Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. And she brings a wealth of experience and scientific background in ecology and conservation management to us today in her presentation. Alongside Adrian Monks, Susan has been co-leading the MBIE Endeavour funded More Birds in the Bush research program since 2018. She will be presenting solo today, but will be joined by Adrian and the rest of the research team from Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research and a range of partner organisations in the online wrap-up seminar next month, which she will share more about today. Being quite new to Manaaki Whenua myself, I still have a lot to learn in this area. The one thing I'm absolutely certain of, though, is that more birds in the bush is a fantastic idea. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Susan. Remember, everyone, to pop any questions you have in the chat as we go, and I will be back online with my face at the end to facilitate the question and answers. All right, thank you. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Jo. I hope everyone can hear me. Tēnā koutou katoa, and thanks to everyone who's come along. I'm sorry you can't see me, and I will try and end up with some time for questions at the end. So today I'm going to introduce the More Birds in the Bush Endeavour Research Program, which, as Jo said, I co-led with Adrian Monks and is just ending, as well as the content of our upcoming end of program webinar in June. These slides moving on. Okay. I'd first really like to acknowledge. Is that moving on?
Sorry,
Jo?
Susan, I think we're on the last slide. We're on the thanks slide at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's the second slide, Jo. It's okay.
Oh, okay.
First, acknowledge
Sorry.
my colleagues, in Manaaki Whenua and our partner organisations who really undertook most of the work and shared their people and data and knowledge with us. So an MBIE Endeavour is fundamentally this team effort, and without the partnership of DOC, of regional and city councils, the Tūhoe Tua Whenua Trust, iwi, community groups and other trusts, this research could not have got off the ground, much less made progress. And from here on, it's really these partners who will use and adapt this research to achieve more birds in the bush, because we, thanking MBIE today for our funder, have used every last cent of that. This research partnership has focused on restoring manu across Aotearoa's large remaining forests, so the big bits we've got left. We recognise that not all forests are the same, and to achieve more birds in the bush, we've got to manage these different forests differently. Our coldest forests are simple, so they've got relatively few species in them, little food and few predators. Often the trees are just dominated by pure beech. Little food and few predators, but when this food and these predators arrive, they come in big pulses, massed seeding events and predator eruptions and subsequent crashes. Warmer forests are complex, they support a greater diversity of species, they provide this greater and more constant supply of food resources for birds, and unfortunately for predators, more of the time. So what really galvanised this program is a profound pattern of forest bird occupancy across a forest temperature gradient, which I've got along the bottom of this graph. And this emerged from work we did with the Ornithological Society of New Zealand's bird atlases from the 1970s and early 2000s. And what we saw, first of all, that there were massive differences in the occupancy of deep endemic bird species, such as rifleman, just an example here, titipunamu, across that temperature gradient. So many more birds in cooler forests, the populations were doing better or they'd completely gone from and they'd completely gone or were doing worse in warmer forests. And as time went on, that situation was getting worse. So endemic bird species were progressively disappearing from warmer forests and undergoing a thermal squeeze into the refuge of our coldest and most inhospitable forests. So there was a clue there that warmth had something to do with it. And that's because higher, more constant food resource productivity associated with warmth favors predators such as ship rats, which then also drive and maintain populations of larger carnivores such as stoats and feral cats. And so ship rats have been a major focus of our program. And we know that temperature and therefore resources, predators and their cascading effects through to birds in the bush are a moving feast as climate warming is progressing right across the temperature spectrum from our coldest to warmest forests. Our program took a whole ecosystem and a mechanistic approach to understanding how food resources, predator dynamics and management work together to affect birds within a particular landscape context and potentially a warming climate right across our large remaining forests. And like our upcoming webinar in June, this research was structured around these four major themes. So in June, 18th and 19th, we've got 2 days set aside to present and dig deep into our results and for questions and feedback. So today I'm only going to have time to run through what we'll present, and I'm not going to try to do any particular result justice or and allow my colleagues who have done the research to present them their work at the webinar in June. So this seminar, if you'll bear with me, is just introducing that content in the hope that you'll join us for some of all of it, or catch up with it online after the 2 days. So if people are busy, it will all be put online afterwards, which will be a resource that you can dip into at your leisure. So starting the webinar, John Innes is going to set the scene for us, describing the underpinning concepts and ideas that really shaped this program, most of which were his. He'll also include some slides about his recent review of North Island quokka co-management. So this is drawing on his unparalleled 4 decades of experience. John's going to talk about and analyse how more birds in the bush was achieved for quokka over that time and what more there is to learn and improve. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that. Then we'll launch into theme 1 of More Birds in the Bush, which aim to get a better handle on the food resources that drive predator and bird populations. And so on the first day, we're going to give 6 different talks on this topic. We're going to be asking how predators that are also omnivores, ship rats and possums, which eat tons of fruit and seed and flowers in the bush every night, affect food resources for birds and other predators in warm forests. Joe Carpenter is going to present the results of a big experiment we've been working on with the Tua Whenua Trusts in their in their magnificent Eastern North Island warm forests, and that's been going for a few years. So we'll hear the first, get the first look at the data in our webinar. Second, Adrian's going to take a systematic look at what predicts the mass seeding of podocarp trees through time and how that may play out into the future of our lowland forests. So to date, we've known and heard a lot about what drives beech masting, but podocarp trees also periodically dump these masses of food resource into the forest and also drive eruption. So this is another key part of the system that we've been working to understand. Third, I will be asking how much reservoirs of ship rats in those rattier, warmer forests at low elevations influence the big eruptions of predators in the critical high elevation forest bird thermal refuges within beech masts. So this is work that followed up from a finding of Joe and Dean Anderson's presentation in our mid-program webinar in 2021 and their recent paper, in which they showed that in the big 2019 eruption at Lake Alabasta, the immigration of ship rats upslope was a key mechanism driving an eruption at high elevations. And so I'm going to be asking, well, does this happen nationally? Is this always the case? And if so, what are the big implications for management of that mechanistic process? We're then going to extend our focus to future climates and a project that in recent months has been co-funded by the Department of Conservation. Adrian's going to first describe how he predicted resource patterns at a national scale in beach masts under different climate warming scenarios, including measures like how total annual resource in seeds per square metre, how the size of that resource is likely to change, and also how the probability of high seedfall events, such as we saw in 2019, that megamast, are likely to change and increase as climate warming develops. Then Georgia Vatiato will talk about how ship rats are going to respond to this. So she's a modeler, and she's taken those masting predictions from that Adrian's developed, and she's looking at what this will mean for ship rat population dynamics in warm and cool forests in New Zealand as our climate changes. So these are two substantial talks on our forest warmer and unfortunately rattier future under climate change. We'll then wrap up the morning of day one with what rats eat and when. So in this program, we were able to peer inside the stomach contents of ship rats for the first time using DNA metabarcoding. Now you can peer into rat stomach contents, but the problem is that rats masticate their food really finely, and so a mechanical examination often leaves us with not really knowing what they've been eating. And so Joe Carpenter and others have been able to use DNA. And so the hypothesis has been that generalist predators such as ship rats surge during a mast cycle feast year, but they decline sharply afterwards, and that it's in the crash year on the way down that they really smash native bird populations because there's so many of them, and they switch to eating birds. And what we found, Joe and others, really challenged the idea that birds may be just an occasional opportunistic prey item in rat diets in New Zealand forests. And also what was found was also contrary to the strong prevailing paradigm that it's the consumption of birds increases once seed resources finish. So we really look forward to seeing those results presented for the first time in June. Predators and management has been the second theme of the More Birds program. Especially, we need to know how effective management is at controlling predators to be able to predict how that will enable populations of forest birds to persist and recover in the bush. And we've got 5 talks on this topic planned for the afternoon of our second day. On Tuesday afternoon, Graham Elliott is going to be giving us a history of DOC's large forest predator management through Battle for Our Birds, Te Akina and Amanu, and up to the present day, and also the surveillance methods, how it's been measuring predators and responding to that. So this is key context for later in the workshop, where we're going to hear how DOC's management is shifting in response to their changing understanding of what's going on and how to manage it, and also how their surveillance methods are moving on with technology and the promise that that holds for better understanding of how to achieve more birds in the bush. Also in this session, Dean Anderson's going to talk about how rat density, the actual number of rats per unit area, relates to the different indices that most forest managers collect using various different methods. Because measuring density is hard, measuring indices is easy, and we hope that they correlate, but there may be some times and places where they don't. And there's very little knowledge of how those two things relate, and it's absolutely critical understanding for managers. So looking forward to that. I'm then going to describe effects of aerial management operations on rodent and stoat activity tracking rates. This will be mainly just a brief update on a talk I gave in our mid-program workshop in 2021, but bringing it up to date after that big 2019 mast event and eruption. But newly in this talk, I'm also going to discuss our first systematic look at how stoat trapping, we know that we do stoat trapping in these big programs in various patches of country, and how that has affected ship rat, mouse and mustelid tracking rates through the years. So our hypothesis in this work was that removing stoats was likely to set off a cascade of effects through that predator food web. Specifically, ship rats would be released when you took off that top-down predation by stoats, and this would in turn suppress mice because there were more rats. And so what I'll be asking is, does this really happen? And you can see that temperature gradient along the bottom of this figure. If so, where and when should we worry about it? Should we worry that stoat trapping may be increasing rat predation on birds while protecting stoat-sensitive species, for example? After this, our dog scientist colleagues take over for a bit. Josh Kemp is going to assess what factors have influenced rat, mouse and stoat kills in past aerial management operations. It may be not what we think and what managers think may be making the difference between a high kill rate and an ordinary and not particularly impressive success rate. And then James Griffiths is going to describe ship rat reinvasion after those operations using his least cost pathway models. So from the rats, we radiocollared on the boundary of an aerial operation early in this program, and this image shows Grant Morris with one of the collared culprits at Lake Alabaster. We know that ship rats can move surprisingly long distances in the months that follow an aerial operation, potentially undoing a lot of the good work and the eradication that's happened. So both knowing how good the kills are and what affects that, and also what happens afterwards, are key bits of understanding for adjusting management to achieve more birds in the bush. And so that set of talks is going to bring us to the end of day one. Our second day is going to focus at first on how birds in the bush respond to food, predators and management in big forests. In the first two talks, first Graham Elliott's going to describe bird outcomes of a major program of multiple aerial management operations in large southwestern forests about a decade ago. They did multiple operations across this matrix of different blocks to try and understand how that was affecting bird outcomes across a whole suite of bird species. So the outcomes of those multiple operations. And then Josh Kemp and Jason Mallam are going to ask whether feral cats are now unwinding some of the early gains of aerial management operations, specifically for Fio and for Kia in other big chunks of the South Island. So this will really focus on, you know, what we know that our management's doing and what may be emerging issues that we need to address to get more birds in the bush. Then Anne Schlesselman is going to take us through her meta-analysis of all of the studies nationally through the years that have painstakingly measured nest survival and adult survival of native birds to discover what has worked to make more birds in the bush. So we know that undertaking these studies is time-consuming and costly and really specialist work, and she's gathered information together across the country and across those temperature gradients and is asking what difference has predator management made, what can we expect from different predator management regimes across the country. The next block of 4 talks has a theme of improving the success of bird reintroductions so that we can put birds back into forests where they have been, where the populations have been depleted, and so that we can understand how they might spread out beyond those large forests and into the wider matrix where we may or may not be doing management. First in this session of 4 talks, Manaya Fenton is going to talk about the dispersal and connectivity of kakaruai, South Island robins, relevant to achieving more birds in the bush beyond the boundaries of eco-sanctuaries and at landscape scale, so into the landscapes in which we live. Zoe Stone's going to talk about population outcomes from reintroduction of North Island robins, Totawai, within large unfenced forests. She's been monitoring Totawai translocations post-release to identify dispersal and habitat use across connected sites within forests. And she will talk about how that research can help managers to better plan how and where to reintroduce in other situations. Kevin Parker is then going to talk about using count data and also, again, habitat connectivity to quantify and predict the success of reintroductions of Popokatia whitehead And finally, in the session, Doug Armstrong and Cara McDermott are going to show how adaptive management can lead to better predicting whether and where a forest bird translocation is likely to succeed or fail. So this is really an area of expertise that Doug and his students and his postdocs have pioneered. And so this is going to be a session that's packed with expertise. Our final session on day 2 is going to bring this stuff together, these different themes. As I said earlier, we took a whole ecosystem mechanistic approach to understand how food resources, predator dynamics, and management affect birds across remaining forests. And we really need a model to help us. And so to bring these things together, we've developed what some of us tried to call the grand model, but Dean modestly calls the broad scale model. This is a tool for increasing our understanding about what matters and what outcomes we can expect from management across large landscapes, and importantly, over many decades. So we can make predictions and model out what is likely to happen given our current understanding, and then tweak the model, put in other parameters, and see what happens. So it's a very useful tool for understanding and predicting bird outcomes. You can better understand when, where, and how to manage threats. We can tweak the climate, so understand how management is likely to have effects under current and under future climates and compare those. And another neat thing is we can look at the outcomes of harvests, such as for translocations or potentially for cultural harvests. So this is the capability of those models, which in the afternoon of day 2, Mandy Barron will describe how that model works, and she'll demonstrate it with an application to care conservation, looking at how the outcomes for care could be changed or could play out with different scenarios. And then Anne Schlesselman and Mandy together are going to describe how the model can be applied to place-based control strategies for outcomes for different bird species with different traits. Our final session of day 2 is going to describe how the Department of Conservation, our largest manager of Indigenous forests nationally, has refined its ecological rationale for management. We'll hear from them about the new prioritisation of operations in their National Predator Control Program, which is the new acronym for what used to be Tiakin and Amanu and Battle for Our Birds. So they've got a new system of determining which places and times to manage. And also they'll talk about its early results, which are quite intriguing. And finally, we'll hear about new surveillance approaches that they're rolling out across large forests, which could transform understanding and management still further. We in Manaaki Whenua are really hoping that this relationship with the Department of Conservation and our other partners can continue into the future, so that we can take advantage of this major resource and continue to learn from it. So you're very warmly invited to join us in all or any of this feast. We will make time for questions through both days, and the presentations, as I said earlier, will all be recorded for later and more leisurely consumption. And just before I go to your questions, hand back to Joe, already online on the Manaaki Whenua website are the presentations from our earlier 2-day mid-program webinar. To reach these, just Google More Birds in the Bush update. We won't be repeating a lot of the material from that earlier workshop, so if you'd like to have a look at those, I invite you to do so. And thank you very much. I'll hand over for questions.
Kia ora, karawe. Susan, thank you so much. That's fascinating, really, really interesting, and absolutely beautiful images as well and photos. There are questions coming in. One perhaps very broad, and so you can either take it or defer it if you prefer, was around the disappearance of our native forests and the impact that has on what we can do with the results that are coming out of this research, essentially. So do you have any comments or any thoughts about that?
Unfortunately, the disappearance has slowed markedly in recent decades. But there's no question that the absence of forest is, the major limiting factor in our production landscapes.
Yeah.
And a lot of our deep endemic birds, from earlier research we've done, are also very, very sensitive to the fragmentation and loss of forests. So they find it really hard to persist in smaller areas, and because they're slow breeding, often a small patch of forest is not going to provide the resources and the continuity and they can't reinvade or get back into these smaller patches. So that's why I think we've had this focus on our big forests that are remaining as the major resource that we've still got to keep large populations of birds large, and the real struggle that we're having to manage predators across those very large areas with their different dynamics.
Yes, and as you said, fortunate that we had the decision in this country a couple of decades ago, to stop the logging of our indigenous forests, so that we do have these large patches still left. Another question, and I recognise we don't have loads of time left, but is there any consideration on the impact of herbivores removing food sources for the birds?
Not in our program, although we have measured food resources. Yeah, but that's really, we didn't actually look at herbivore removal or anything like that. As I said, Joe Carpenter's going to talk about actually removing possums and ship rats, which are also omnivores. But yeah, there's almost certainly a lot of research, a lot of evidence that the cleaning out of the understories of native forests is having an effect on food, and then how that flows through the system, through the predators and the birds is a damn good question.
Great, thank you. There's quite a lot of technical questions coming in about the accessibility of the video recordings that will be made at the webinar coming up. Yes, as Susan said, they will all be available, and we will be able to share a link to that page where they'll be available in the follow-up to today. Just to remind people as well, we always make an effort to answer all of the questions that come in. So if we don't get to your question today, then we will be able to follow up by email with an answer for you. Just looking for a relatively quick question with only 2 minutes left. Perhaps I'll ask you one I have myself, Susan. This looks like a huge program, and a lot of work that's been done and a lot of work to take forward. And you've mentioned the wide range of partnerships that have been involved. Do you have any highlights that you could share with us about those partnerships from a broad perspective? I'm not asking you to score them, of course, but is there anything?
There are a lot, yeah, but I think our partners have been absolutely key. I mean, one of the things with an Endeavour is that you're learning as you go along, and you're learning with people who are doing the management and who are at the coalface, and so it really keeps that research as relevant and the models as relevant as they can be. The ability to do experiments, we absolutely need the partnership of those forest owners and managers, and Endeavour is an amazing opportunity to do a big experiment. We had big experiments like Alabaster, at Pirongia, in the Tua Whenua forests. I've really loved our partnership with our DOC colleagues, who are really at the coalface, and just that ready communication, because what you see is that as understanding changes, it just gets almost instantly taken up in management, which is why sort of in this workshop we've got quite a focus on that changing understanding, because it's almost effortless having that partnership and working closely with people at the coalface. I know that our us researchers working on translocations have had amazing relationships too with sanctuaries and trusts, and who have just made their resources available. So you can just do so much more.
Yeah, and I mean, reaching out into the public as well. We've seen some fantastic stories in the media recently about some of those translocations rather. So yeah, it's fantastic to see the work that you and your team have been doing, making real impact for all of us, more birds in the bush. We are at time, so we'll just wrap up quickly. Yes, the questions and answers will also be made available to everyone as well once they've been answered. I see that one's coming in. And just to let people know also, we are looking at a new platform for the webinars going ahead. We're aware that some government departments in particular have some difficulty accessing GoToWebinar with security blocks and so on. So there will be something else coming your way, and another invitation with you shortly. Keep an eye on your inbox. Thanks again, everyone, for being here with us today. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Mā te wā, ka kite anō.